The Life of Jesus, Part 1 by Koji Komiya. Birth and early life to his spiritual development. Think of Jesus from a new perspective.
こんにちは。今日はですね、イエスですね。イエス・キリストのですね、生涯をですね、追ってみたいと思います。
Hello. Today I'm going to talk about Jesus, the life of Jesus Christ. I'd like to follow his life path. The records about him are in the 4 Gospels. The writers were his 3 direct disciples and 1 grandson disciples. Really very little, but his words and deeds are told by the disciples in these 4 Gospels. From the Gospels, we know that Jesus was born in Bethlehem around Galilee Lake. The description of when he was 13 years old is the last until he returned to his home in Israel again and was baptized by John in the Jordan River when he was 30 years old. These 17 years are all missing. It was only 3 years after the baptism that he preached in the Israel area centered on Lake Galilee. And finally, he went to the palace in Israel and was captured at Gethsemane and crucified. This was his basic life history. He disappeared from history at the age of 33, but after that, according to Sai Baba in India, he lived to be nearly 80 years old and was active in North India mainly. We'd like to follow in his footsteps. It may be hard for strict Christians to admit that scriptures on Jesus remain in many places in India. Even from the prophecies of Agastya, it was said that Jesus went to South India. Based on those records, this time, I'd like to build a lecture on it. Yes, this is a journey through the life of Jesus. In this first installment, we're going to look at Jesus' period of spiritual learning. I'd like to describe the first half of the 17 years that were missing.
はい、これはですね、イエスの誕生にですね、博士たちが、
This is the scene of Jesus' birth, in which the scholars, 3 wise men, have come and are blessing. On the screen is his father Joseph. Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Joseph and his mother Mary were living in a town called Nazareth, in the north of Israel. Nazareth is a very rural area. According to the information available, it's a small community of about 300 people now. They lived in a cave. In those days, the people in that area lived in caves. Joseph's cave, Mary's family's cave, and caves for other people. They all lived in a cave. About Jesus' father Joseph, he is mentioned as being a carpenter. When we say carpenter in Japan, we think of a man with a planer and hammer who is going to erect the lumber and build a house. The carpenters in Nazareth at that time were some cutters and plasterers, stone cutters and plasterers. They used to make floorings in the caves. Basically, they cut the stones and piled them up. Stone was the center of their culture. This is one example of where the Japanese translation of the Bible is quite different. The scene you see here also differs. Jesus was born in a cave. The Japanese translation says that he was born in a stable. I have visited this place. There were 3 or 4 big and long connected caves. At one end of a cave, they piled up the straw, and he was born. At the time, there was a population census. Joseph and Mary made a journey from the village of Nazareth that took about 4 or 5 days, with Mary sitting on a donkey. Joseph went to the temple of Israel and registered for the census there. Then Mary went into labor, and they tried to find a place to stay for the birth. But there were no decent places to stay, so they ended up in a big horse cave. They were allowed to use one end of it, and that's where Jesus was born. And while they were there, some scholars from the East, the three wise men, learned from astrology that the great Savior was to be born. They decided to go to see this new Savior. At first, they went to the king, which was the wrong place because Jesus wasn't there. Then, they were led by a mysterious star. They got to the cave where Jesus was born on the outskirts of Bethlehem. This is the scene where they are blessing the newborn Jesus. This is the cave house of his father Joseph, where later onwards, after having returned to the village of Nazareth, Jesus was given a lesson by him sitting at the table. His mother, Mary, is on the left. Before Jesus' birth, originally the Jews had a prophecy that the Messiah would come from them and shepherd the people of Israel. I'm going to read that to you from Matthew. You, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, you'll never be the least in all towns of Judah, for one great ruler will come out of you and shepherd my people Israel. At the time of Jesus' birth, there was a king named Herod, who ruled the Jewish kingdom of Israel. The huge Mediterranean Empire at that time was ruled by the Roman Empire. Israel, which was in this empire, was a small country of very rebellious Jewish people that were unruly. The Jewish rebels of that time would have been seen by the Roman Empire as a terrorist organization. There were several such groups among these Israelites who went against Rome. Returning to the story, from the east of the country, the scholars came to Jerusalem at the time of King Herod. They said to him, "Where is Christ, the King of the Jews, who is being born at this time? Because we saw this star appear in the heavens, we came to worship him." So King Herod was afraid that such a great king would be born and steal Israel from him. And he sent a group of soldiers to track where these scholars were going. Consequently, he found out that they had gone to Bethlehem. And it was confirmed that Christ had been born there. Then he killed all the children born in Bethlehem, who were under 2 years old. To rescue them from the threat they faced, an angel came in a dream to Jesus' father Joseph and told him to flee to Egypt. He received that instruction as a kind of prophecy. Following this, the family fled to Egypt, and again the angel appeared in Joseph's dream and told him to go back because it would be all right. This picture shows that when they got back to Nazareth, they started living in peace. So you see, King Herod, who was ruling over Israel at the time, was a warlord of warlords. He had killed almost all of his family to accede to the throne. He was a very fierce and ruthless man. Sathya Sai Baba said that Jesus was a very bright child in Jerusalem at the age of 17. The reputation that he was the Messiah had been established throughout Israel, and it then became a threat to his life. When he was 17 years old, supporters of Jesus took the boy Jesus to a caravan and set out on a journey to North India. So it is said. Satya Sai Baba said that when he was 17 years old, Jesus went on a journey with a group of merchants, firstly to North India. He said that Jesus went into northern India. By the end of his life, Jesus was 76 years old. Satya Sai Baba also said he passed away in Lahore, in what is now Pakistan, at nearly 80 years of age. They say that his life at that age is still chronicled in the books that have been written about him. There is a Tibetan oral tradition called Issa biography, according to which Jesus first came to northern India. It is said that he followed his teacher there and studied yoga for about 3 years. Jesus used psychic powers or divine powers, for example, materializing the nothingness, walking on water, or making predictions. That is totally in keeping with those used by Indian yoga. This is what Satya Sai Baba and Agastya and other sages used.
で、その後ですね、イエスはですね、仏教の一切教ですね。当時はですね、イエスの来た頃はちょうど
Then, at that time, Jesus began to read the Buddhist all sutras. It is said that the age Jesus was living in was when the united Magadha kingdom had just fallen, and the scriptures had been interpreted to those of Pali and Sanskrit and had been disseminated. When Jesus became aware of the Buddha's teachings, he began to read the entire all sutras. While doing so, he, of course, noticed the Lotus Sutra. After noticing the Lotus Sutra, he put yoga and all other sutras away. He just devoted himself to the Lotus Sutra. He went into a secluded area of the Himalayas when he was 20 years old, so it is said. So for 5 years, he lived a life of meditation and reading of the Lotus Sutra during the day. Then, at the age of 25, he attained enlightenment. He realized that he was the Messiah, as foretold in the Old Testament. And he also realized what he would have to go through. After the Messiah first demonstrates his invincible divine power to the people, he would be betrayed by the disciples and killed like a dog. Then he would be flogged and lifted up on a cross to be laid bare for all to see. After 3 days of death, by resurrecting and showing himself to his disciples, he turns his disciples into the invincible bodhisattvas, apostles. He understood the meaning of that life in an instant, but hated the thought of being killed. Following this, according to Agastya's prophecy, when he was 25 years old, he went to southern India. He went there to escape from the impending reality for nearly 5 years. But he reconsidered and decided to choose his life as the Messiah, and to live a lifetime in accordance with God's will. Thus, he returned to Jerusalem, back to northern India and onwards to Jerusalem. This is what Agastya's prophecy says. Also, according to the Tibetan book called Issa biography, Jesus went around Kapilavastu, Gridrakuta in Rajagruha, where the Buddha taught the Lotus Sutra, and at Benares, sightseeing and pilgrimage, where the Buddha did his first sermon called The First Turning of the Wheel of Dharma. It says that he spent his time in that way. So for Jesus, the Buddha and the Lotus Sutra were the most significant things in his life. However, the Bible omits these important events completely. If there was a world or era from which the fifth gospel of Simon Peter came out, These descriptions would all be written here. This is the landscape that Jesus witnessed in India at the time of his spiritual learning. There would have been villages like this one, and food. It's a set of dishes of southern India called meals. And in northern India, it's thalaya. Jesus also ate these foods with his hands. He must have seen these temples in southern India. There must have been many sadhus as well. Jesus would probably have seen these goma burning ceremonies and things like that. And after he noticed the Buddhist scriptures, especially the Lotus Sutra, they became all he was interested in. People at this stage of Jesus' development will read no other scriptures but the Lotus Sutra. Jesus at the time spoke such words as Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic. In addition, by learning over some years, Jesus would have been able to read even Pali and Sanskrit. Later on, back in his country, Jesus uses the word Father. He really meant the Buddha when he said Father. The word Abba was used by Jesus, meaning Father. Father is Abba, Ab in Aramaic. For the Japanese, it looks like the Jews are saying God, God, but actually it means Father, Father. Jesus therefore always referred to the Buddha as Abba, referring from the following story. The Hebrew word for God is Elohim, so he said Father instead of God. This word Father comes from a father that appears in the parable told in the chapter of the lifetime of the Tathagata in the Lotus Sutra. In this parable, a father who was a physician was raising his children. He was expounding the Lotus Sutra,